Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Nick Richmond. I'm one of the directors of Tricordant, and I lead the design practice. It's great to have you joining us here live. For those who are joining us later or non-live, then it's lovely for you to come along and watch this. If you've been reading our LinkedIn podcasts and blogs, you'll know that we've been talking about and thinking about the idea of elegant simplicity this year. So this is the leadership and design discipline that focuses on designing out unnecessary complexity so that the organization can think clearly, decide faster, and direct energy to what truly matters. I'm joined today by two friends, associates and co-authors of Elegant Simplicity, Tammy Noel and Alex Poppleton. And Tammy is a transformation change consultant and coach. She has 25 years experience working with senior leaders in the public sector. And Tammy is also on the board of OD&E, which is the Organization Development Network for Europe. Now, Alex is an organization development and design consultant and interim, and she specializes in complex transformations and culture change. Alex has 25 years of bringing human-centered approach to organizational change across public and private sector. So Tammy, Alex, great for you to join us as some of our provocateurs on the panel. So here's the basic agenda. Lots of time for us to have good conversations in the panel. And I'm going to start us off with a bit of a provocation. But this is an interactive webinar. So please feel free to post your questions into chat. We'll try to pick these up during the panel as we explore some of the questions and see where we go. Of course, we'd love to arrange a coffee with yourselves to provide some ideas and insights to help you in your organization to move from complex bureaucracy to clarity. So there's a link there. There's my email address. If you want to arrange a call with myself, Tammy or Alex, or as you prefer, maybe you want to speak to all three of us at once. That'll be great fun. There's also some case studies and a podcast that we've been producing in the Elegant Simplicity series as well for you to listen to at your leisure. So let me talk about moving from bureaucracy to clarity. I think we're all experiencing this. If you're in civil service, if you're working in that space, then you're just recognizing that the environment is changing. It's much more variable and volatile today versus a few years ago. And just think about Trump changing tariffs, starting new wars, all these financial pressures. Now, if we step back and look at our organizational theory, things like law of requisite variety says that organizations must develop their internal complexity and flexibility to be able to handle the variety of the surrounding environment. Otherwise, they will be overwhelmed. And this really came up for me this past week. I was on a call to a utility company. My concern was not something they could immediately deal with. So they bounced me between three different departments. And finally, I got some type of resolution after about an hour on the phone, where I thought that this was going to be just a quick WhatsApp set of messages with them and be able to resolve it. Now, many organizations are also built for a different era. And with the pressure to deliver, they often just add quick fixes rather than fundamentally rethinking and rethinking their operating model and design. And of course, that leads to further complexity. And we know that complexity is a performance tax. Now, every time I look at this photograph, I do, sometimes I laugh, sometimes I smile, but it's in empathetic frustration with this player. And I think some of us feel like this at times. He's trying his best, but there's this continuous accumulation of processes and controls and reviews, often faster than these can be removed. That just leads to organizational treacle. More in this case, maybe it's more about a mud bath. And there's a list of some ideas there. But a couple of examples that I've experienced in the last year or so. I was supporting a chief information officer at one public sector organization. And there's a strategic plans to deliver a huge technical debt of legacy systems, about 150 projects in the backlog. Many of the key people were developing their own solutions and AI agents. And then they're setting up meetings with the CIO and her colleagues to argue, hang on, can we not embed this solution, this agent, into our enterprise architecture? Never mind the GDPR or cybersecurity issues. And then another example, and it's one that I quoted in the first Elegant Simplicity blog. It was the chief executive of an airline who said, our strategy is everything, everywhere, all at once. So what this led to was an ever-expanding senior structure. And these senior managers were brought in to try and glue the organization and hold it together. But there's a default amongst these senior leaders to add and to keep on adding to try and resolve issues. And as they added, so it led to additional work required, leading to more senior managers being needed, and so the cycle continued. Now, every addition, however well-intentioned, creates drag, slows decisions, increases cognitive load, and leads to higher costs. Our research published in the journal Nature shows humans tend to add solutions even when subtraction is more effective. And under pressure, the research shows that this bias intensifies. Now, in the civil service, you're full of scrutiny, and often this bias explains why solutions often take the form of one or more process, one more layer, one more committee, one more role. So the question becomes, what if the biggest blocker to transformation isn't resistance? It's my bias. The other thing to consider is, what are you carrying? Leadership fatigue isn't always about capability, resilience, or not sufficiently working on yourself. It often comes from carrying complexity that should never existed in the first place. Remember, fatigue is rarely a personal issue. It's often a design signal. So the question isn't, how do we cope better? It is, what should not exist at all? Because leadership isn't about absorbing complexity, it's about designing it out. I was working with a chief executive and CMO of a healthcare organization a few years ago. And they're amazing people, but they're trying to carry the whole system. That was looking after maybe about 1.5 million people. They're trying to carry it on their shoulders. And they didn't really trust the way that their healthcare system operated. They'd try and step in and resolve everything. They'd just be there every time. And my advice to them was, well, that's just not healthy. You need to stop that. But in this case, the public sector has a dark side, and they really felt that their identity was to martyr themselves for their system because they so deeply cared about the patients and the people that they're looking after. So in that case, my advice was rejected. So it's important to remember that elegant simplicity is a leadership discipline, not a silver bullet. I'll say that again. Elegant simplicity is a leadership discipline, not a silver bullet. So simplicity demands clarity of purpose, intentional design, and courageous choices, deciding what to stop as much as what to start. So this begins, of course, within yourself, understanding your worldview, your biases, how you show up, your needs, and how you work with others. Now, I know that I have been this in the past, and I know some of us in this room, in this space, may also be. We can be firefighters, so when things go wrong, people look to us to resolve the issues. But firefighting must not be the default. It should be the extreme. Now, Gladwell talks about the 10,000 hour rule. And though people may debate the exact number, the principle is that, as with all disciplines, elegant simplicity takes time and effort and a fair amount of courage. So it is possible. So simplicity isn't doing less, it's doing what matters, and everything else is noise. I used this slide at a recent Government Department Away Day, just to highlight the interdependency between culture and system. And as the quote says there, culture is an emergent property of the system, and the system is an emergent property of culture. So it's important to remember that when you're designing work, when you're making choices, you're making it within a culture. And that means that you may have these blind spots and biases because of the culture that you're within. I was speaking with Tim Haynes during an Elegant Simplicity podcast a little while ago, and he is sharing his experience in pharma. And in pharma, there's this a culture of rewarding cleverness and expertise. Now, these are both important characteristics of pharma, important for innovation, important for ensuring safety and the manufacture of medicines. However, he also noted that cleverness and expertise can be synonymous with adding complexity. People tend to be celebrated when they created this really complex solution because it made them look good, it really celebrated their expertise. Now, elegant simplicity reframes expertise as the ability to bring clarity, to remove friction, and to make work flow. So the question you should ask is, do we reward the people who make things clearer or the people who make things cleverer? Now, we're big advocates of AI. If you've been reading some of our podcasts, listening to our podcasts and reading our blogs and articles, you'll see that AI is the Intel inside. That's how we see it. It's an Intel inside of your organization, accelerating whatever's there. However, we need to think about relationships because AI requires relationships. As you add relationships into a system, so it adds complexity. By adding AI into a broken system, it'll accelerate and scale the complexity of that system. So I explored this in the first Elegant Simplicity podcast with Tejal Shah, and we concluded that AI will not save your operating model, it will actually expose it. So before we add AI, we must remove friction. We must reduce unnecessary complexity first. Now, we use tools like Reconfig, and there's many others out there. So AI can provide leaders a strategic view, allowing them to create a symphony of value across the AI-enhanced operating model. Now we use things like Reconfig as part of diagnostics and to create digital twins. And we've been using it in the NHS to make sense of large swathes of data. You may have 1,000 pages of transcript notes or 18,000 lines on a Excel spreadsheet and then about 30 columns deep. And there's a lot of data there. So this helps us inform our design thinking to create the less complex operating models. And in One Healthcare Trust, we reduced the number of divisions from 8 to 4. And that, of course, in itself reduced the number of relationships and the overall complexity of the organization, giving them much more focus. So here's the call to action as I bring this provocation into land. It's something I see leaders struggling with, and that is saying no or being unable to prioritize. So the challenge is, what can you subtract in your life, your work, your organization for impact? Is it meetings, approvals, duplicated reporting, redundant governance, or things like legacy policies? Maybe it's negative behaviors. Maybe it's your own negative behaviors. So what does this look like then for leaders when you get this right? Well, leaders can step back without risk. They can, they don't need to be around because there's going to be fewer escalations, fewer rescues, fewer meetings to compensate for. There'll be less opportunity for unclear direction, less opportunity for duplication or confused authority. So I'll end with this. In a world addicted to addition, elegant simplicity is a radical leadership act. Not doing less, but deciding better. I'm just going to pause our share. Come off there. So hopefully that's given you a chance to get the juices going, to have a think. Because now it's time to kick off the panel, and we've got Alex and Tammy joining me. And we're going to try and focus on the practice orientation rather than the concept and ideas. We really want to kind of land this into practice, give you some ideas of what you can go away and experiment with. So I've got a couple of questions that I've set up with Alex and Tammy, just to give you a chance to think what's the question you'd like to ask and type it into chat. So the first question I'm going to direct to Tammy, and that is, if we're banning new initiatives for a year and only allowing simplification moves, pruning, clarifying, that kind of stuff, what do you think would actually happen to the performance and morale of a team or an organization?
Well, what a wonderful concept that would be. I can imagine most people on the call would be delighted if suddenly there were no new initiatives. People would be delighted if they could deliver things to their intention. But I think it would allow a new rhythm to occur if you were able to deliver pieces of work to their outcome. But essentially, if nothing new were coming down from the top, it would allow organizations and teams to see what's important. As you were essentially be able to see what the patterns in the organization were. What are the priorities that are showing up? You'd be able to kind of take data from the organization and then be able to act on that data. So if people are familiar with, the sort of adaptive action of what, so what, now what, what's showing up in the organization. So what does that mean? And what do we do about that? Be able to actually see that in real time, you'd be able to see what the prevailing patterns were, what that means in terms of issues for the organization, but also ways of working too, and be able to come up with some actual actions to be able to work on those, and then be able to once again look at what those prevailing patterns were. Whereas so often in the civil service, we look at doing things that are in response to our organizational patterns, and we have work coming in that's poured in at the top through the hopper that comes in from Cabinet Office too, or comes in from our ministers, in sort of two hoppers, that then can, just totally de-influence what we're trying to do within our departments, which is very unsettling and creates another layer or different layers of complexity. And that's what makes it, a complex system, isn't it? The fact that we have things, I can see Richard saying there, it's about Tetris, it's great, isn't it, in those early stages, but it will be a bit more like that. Things will slow down. And I can also see people kind of going, that's great, it'd be lovely if it was like that, but we're never going to be in a situation where actually people stop pouring things in the hopper from Cabinet Office and ministers stop saying, do you know what? I've decided that we're going to do this. So actually, what can you do? Well, I think it's all about scale. It's all about finding a place in the organization where actually you can start stripping things away. And when you strip things away, you can start seeing what those prevailing patterns are, because those prevailing patterns in the organization will be working at scale somewhere. So where in the organization could you start stripping things away, stripping things back? There will be areas in your organization where you can do this. And it's all about thinking, so if it works here, we can start scaling this up somewhere. And just starting small and thinking about how you light those little fires, because it will make a difference, I promise you. Yeah,
and I'm loving the metaphors that are coming through on chat. So we've got
I love it.
The brewery metaphor now coming through with the hopper. Loving it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is. Yeah. I often see work just coming down and people sort of like, oh my God, almost like the grain, the grain kind of coming up to here and thinking, stop it. We've got to.
Yeah. So, Alex, what about you?
Teresa saying the blizzard as well. I think it feels like that, doesn't it? Where you're sort of in this whirl, and it's really hard to see. I think that's a great metaphor as well. It's hard to see because you're just caught up in the middle of it. Yeah, and it's really difficult to know where to do that. It's easy to say, and it's hard to do, isn't it? So how do we find those places? And I think one of the things I've been focusing on is thinking about. We often talk about design principles, but the real purpose of design principles is to get to the real hub of kind of what are we really trying to do. And the reason we try to use them when we're designing is because it really forces you to ask the question, what really matters? Back to that quote that you had, Nick, about the Lencioni quote, that if everything matters, then nothing really matters. So, so I think it's also looking at that wealth of all the things coming in and saying, well, what is the key essence of all of these, or what's the key thread between them, and which are the pieces actually that are not core to that, or are not the key spirit, or are not the key kind of like, without stripping it back to being just the basics, because actually just doing the basics on everything probably doesn't work either.
Yeah.
So how do you keep enough richness but keep the essence of it, I think. But having, one of the things is having the kind of breathing space to try and have those conversations and try and think, what would that look like if we could strip back some of the complexity on this? What would a kind of better designed version of this look like, in the sense of even the starting point, rather than designing the answer or the solution, actually coming back to what would be a better designed question or a better designed challenge here? How do we do that bit better? If we asked a better designed question, we would then not run into loads of complex and complicated solutions immediately trying to solve the problem.
Yeah, and I'm just, again, in chat, we've got Debbie talking about the new shiny. Often the new shiny is the thing that distracts and people go after, thinking it's like, as Steve Pearson will say, a silver bullet. It's going to solve all my problems, right? And certainly I've seen that. So it's important to really get to grips with what are they thinking that new shiny thing is going to help resolve, and unpicking that, understanding it, and then working out whether the new shiny is actually going to help, or maybe there's a route that doesn't need all that, and so you can find a way forward. There's often that what we talk about with clients and talk about when we're sharing with people on our training courses, talk about, when a client comes in with a new shiny thing, and so, let's make this work. So, okay, well, what is behind it? Whether that's AI, whether that's agile, or insert your preferred term of something else. So getting to grips with what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve. I think my perspective is, if we banned new initiatives for a year and allowed only simplification moves, then I think the assumption is, at least, and I think we've seen this as well with our practices, that performance will likely increase, because you're removing that friction, that clutter, all the distractions, you're taking them away. And when you take away distraction, then teams can focus on their purpose. They can focus on the stuff that's really going to make a difference. And so engagement is likely to go up, because people see the work that they're doing making the difference, and seeing how that impacts colleagues and customers, citizens, patients, whatever the term may be. And you cut away that internal busyness industry. And then, of course, morale will improve, because they can see they're making this difference. That's making that change, and therefore I'm feeling better about it. I feel more engaged. I'm working with the team, and we're not having to juggle all this other stuff that just keeps us busy. So another question, while we're just waiting for one or two questions to come in, is, let's kind of get this really practical. What's one practical way leaders can use things like design principles and clear intent, without having to write yet another thesis or another massive strategy document, to help the organization move forward? Alex, do you want to come on that?
Actually, I was reading Fiona's question, or the point that she was making. Sorry. Did you say something, Tammy?
I said I was also reading the questions as well. Yes.
And I was thinking about that challenge between that pull of, like, how do we create cultures which enable people to make decisions and give people autonomy and enable them to be change agents at the same time as getting stuff done. So without restricting so much freedom, and yet we need to also operate in a cohesive way. So finding ways to do that, bringing people together so that their thinking can start, I think that's the beginning of it, rather than, as I said at the beginning, just rather than launching into let's quickly delegate all the work into programs or something, starting with more really good conversations at the beginning to think, well, before we all jump at this, how do we clarify and simplify the request? And are there ways in which we could actually not run 6 different lines of this or pieces that go into this. Actually, is there a way that we could do this together? And how could we ensure that each of the people working on this doesn't feel like they're just on that silo, but actually is connected, so that the kind of overall meaning and value it's not just value delivered, but it's actually meaning delivered for the people working on it too.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just connecting that with Richard's point in the chat around creating space, in essence. I think what I find one of my superpowers is convening. So I convene conversations and create space in which those happen. I think all of us in the OD&D profession and leaders too need to find that time and that space. And it'll be different for each each person, of course. Some people will find that they'll like to take deliberate time out, take a day off, or maybe they'll just have part of their own practice during the day, that they'll take some time out during the day to do some of that. So, but creating that time and space is really important. And that came up, and it kind of links to what Alison was saying as well around cultural diagnostics. So I'm just thinking of an organization that I supported a little while ago. It was a government executive agency, and they had asked us to help them assess their culture and then to help inform them how to develop their culture going forward. And so what we agreed with them was creating some time and space for their organization, or at least a microcosm of their organization, to come together to reflect on how things operated and how their culture showed up. And one of the things that we spotted was they had an award-winning cultural framework, but it was a hugely complicated framework. It had like 7 different aspects, and within each aspect there's a maturity model, like 4 or 5 different boxes. So you could imagine some of these leaders looking at this thing and going, what am I supposed to do with all this? So what we did with them is we said, okay, well, let's step back. Let's actually understand the intent of what you're trying to achieve and the strategy of your organization. Now let's think about what are the simple 5 behaviors that need to show up at whatever level of organization you're operating at. And let's agree on those at least. So everyone's really clear. This is how we're going to operate. This is the way we're going to work together. And so that was one way of creating that space, giving time for reflection, engaging more than just 1 or 2 people, but a microcosm of the organization, so that it builds a momentum, a critical mass into the organization, and changes that culture over time, but focuses it on those simple, most impactful things that are going to help them move forward and move that needle, and then give them a chance to constantly review. So embedding that process of continuously reviewing things as they move things forward. So that's kind of one practical way that we've helped and work that through. So Tammy, I haven't given you a chance to kind of respond to that question, a practical way leaders can use things like, the big picture design principles or clear intent.
So I agree with everything that you said, really. I think it's about really using them. So one of the things that I notice, because I think design principles are so often things that are created and then they are lost really quickly. They're just like an artifact that is created.
Yay, then move on.
And, so often with organization design, people just see organization design as creating the boxes on the page, and then leaders kind of go, great, we've done our bit. Whereas, organization design, the hard bit is actually the implementation and doing all the roles and making sure that like everything kind of maps in and everything beds down. That's kind of the 80% almost. Like the doing the boxes on the page is like the really easy bit that leaders kind of see as being organization design. And so the design principles kind of get done at the start in like an early workshop, and they just get put in a drawer. Whereas actually, if we were to kind of hold our design principles, throughout the design process, right the way through implementation. And whenever I'm writing design principles, just going back to, who was talking about, Alison, about culture diagnostic.
Yeah.
So, Alison, one of the things that I do when I'm working on a piece of organisation design is to get people to think about articulating the culture that they want and think about how you bake it into the design. So I try and make an organisation design principle culture-based. So that then when you're thinking about the operating model, which usually is a pictorial operating model because the operating model is often lots of documents, and then when you're thinking about the structure, you have to think about, so what is this future culture? How does it impact on the operating model and the structure? So, for example, if we're saying we want to be more agile or we're saying we want people to have autonomy, we don't create a really high structure. You know, we don't create massive spans of control if we're saying we want people to be agile. You know, we don't create these real kind of monolith organizations. If we're saying that we want to get rid of silos in our culture, or as one of our design principles, we don't have 15 stovepipes. You know, so we use it to challenge our structural design, whereas often what we do with design is we kind of go, oh, we need to do something about culture right at the end, when we've already made decisions about governance, we've made decisions about structure, and it's the same with governance. We want people to feel that they have autonomy, then we need to think about what's the governance process. If they need to have sign-off for buying a packet of crisps or something, that's not giving them autonomy. You know, where's the level of risk sitting? You know, where is the level of sign-off on all of these things? You've got to make sure that it's reflecting the culture that you want to build and that it's there right from the start, so it's literally stitched in. And so that's the way in which you can think about cultural diagnostic or cultural conversations right at the start and carrying it right the way through to the way that you're writing roles, the way that you're doing your governance, thinking about risk, all of those things. Everything is marrying that. And it goes back to design principles. If you've got something about culture in your design principles, it should be reflected all the way through.
Yeah. And particularly if you really understand the intent behind the design principles.
Yeah.
Is really important, and kind of working that through. And I see Debbie's talking about in her department, principles are key throughout the design process.
That is brilliant, Debbie. But Debbie is an absolute superstar. You know.
Yeah. And again, it's about discipline. And I talked about the 10,000 hours before, and it's just keeping that discipline, bringing people back and leaders back to that discipline of saying, okay, this is what we're intending to do. These are the way that we're going to evaluate how well we're meeting our intention all the way through. So Charlotte poses an interesting question. Does complexity provide a buffer for failure when a simpler approach can leave people more exposed? It's an interesting question. I think there's a lot in there. I don't know, Charlotte. I don't know if you want to just expand on that a little bit. Do you want to come off mute and just expand that a little bit for us?
Afternoon. I wasn't planning on coming off camera, so thanks for that.
That's okay.
No, I think the point I was trying to get at is if you're in maybe there's also this cultural thing about failure, isn't there? But is there just more hiding places if you've got something that's more complex? So it's almost been less accountability, whereas like the basics are like it is a discipline. When you see it's like hard to get the basics right all the time. So I just think, does that give a bit of a buffer for people if they're in a culture where there's not an appetite for failure?
Okay, all right. Now I understand that context a bit more, because I was looking at it through my lens, saying, you know, is complexity a good thing because it provides a buffer for failure when failure is accepted and celebrated because you're constantly learning. So you frame it the other way, which is helpful to understand. So and certainly I came off a call earlier today, and we're talking to their people who head up quality, and the question in my mind was, how much of this organization is a black box to quality? It's a similar sort of idea where they don't want quality to come in and look because they may be failing or they may not be doing things the way that they ought to be doing them in order to fulfill the needs of their customers. I suspect that there can be a bit of obfuscation from leaders and others because they don't want to be found out, and they may try and make things a bit more complex. But I think that's...
just to add a different perspective, I think sometimes in cultures that have a lot of failure built in, there's also the opposite tendency too. Let's simplify it. actually to the point where we're trying to oversimplify and take all the complexity out, because it makes succeeding look easier, or it makes it look like I'm succeeding when actually I'm avoiding the difficult things. So I think where you've got a culture of blame, lots of strategies exist to manage around that, because it's very difficult to live in. So I think it goes back to the kind of what's the real essence of what you're trying to do here? Is it actually how much of the complexity can be taken out without losing meaning, without losing the kind of what it means? Can you simplify it? And does it still achieve what it wants? Or, sometimes, but if you go too far, that doesn't help either. So I think it's about, but what really makes the difference is engaging with that, talking with other people. So you're not the only person deciding, that actually it becomes a process of thinking together with other people, which I think is something that Fiona raised and other people have raised too. How do you make this more of to embed this thinking into your culture? You actually have to do it with other people rather than do it on your own.
Yes.
Just coming in on that, I can see that Richard has raised a point there around, in his organisation, they're using the language, but actually how do you get people to do it? I think there's also something about making people feel safe to fail.
Yeah.
So how do you make leaders, when we've had so much in the civil service, we've had years and years of kind of like a blame culture. Yeah. And, if you get it wrong, somebody's going to go. Actually, what we're talking about now is, and that's why we have such tight governance, I need assurance on this. It's about kind of what we're talking about is stripping some of that away, which is why I talked about where are the places where we can start and scale up. It's like, how do we build trust? How do we build trust with those people that still need that assurance? Because that isn't going to go away overnight. But also it's about that psychological safety, isn't it? For people to feel that they have trust with each other. I feel trust with you, you feel trust with me. So it's about those two things concurrently, I think. I feel trust that you will be able to do the job, and also I feel trust with you that we're okay with each other. And it takes a long time.
And I think there's a particular pressure in public service. I think you have the additional pressure of providing value to the public purse and an additional level of scrutiny. But at the same time, public sector and the civil service being asked to innovate. You can't innovate without making some mistakes, because otherwise that's not innovation. If you've got it right every time, that's not really innovation. That's already, a strategy that is going to work. So it's very difficult to hold those both together, but giving space for that and saying, how do we have some more experimental things? How do we do a bit more design thinking, a bit more innovation? Can we have some small experiments that enable us to try some other things? And instead of blaming who or what went wrong, actually look at, what did we learn from that? And what did we all learn, rather than who made the mistake, and who's accountable. So it's that keeping governance in the right places, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you need governance for big amounts of money or big projects, but where you are allowed to actually try some things out without it being a catastrophe. It doesn't work.
Really good questions. There's a couple of really good questions.
Let's try and.
So there's one around there's a couple around AI, particularly both Richard and Debbie touching on. Thinking about using AI to help simplify things is one of those questions. So yes, we are using AI to assist with this. And it's really important, connecting to Richard's point, is being really clear on the value that you're creating and being consistent on that. Because in some private sector organizations, they start off with a great set of value propositions that serve their customer base. But over time, those value propositions are degraded because maybe the profit mentality overtakes the creating value mentality. I don't think public sector can afford to do too much of that before there'll be a vote and they'll change the government, and then there'll be a renewed pressure to be adding more value. But please argue against me on that if you feel I'm wrong. But I certainly think it's important to be really clear what is the value that you are creating, and then ensuring that you understand the value streams, those critical few steps of activities that create that value. Because for me, at the heart of organization design is work, and understanding the value that's created through that work. You then cluster that work together to form your teams or functions, departments, directorates, whatever, and then integrate across them. That's, in essence, organization design. And we use AI to help us map out and understand those value streams, and then to identify where in those value streams there's opportunities to insert generative AI to take away the more standardized administrative type work, enabling people to have much more meaningful roles and work within. And you can use a number of tools and technologies to do that. In one of the slides that I showed earlier, you would have seen a scale of automation potential. I think it was around about 50% for that particular organization. In others, it's close to 30%. And it all depends on what the organization is doing, of course. So yes, that is possible. But I'm wondering if other people, so Alex and Tammy, your kind of experience or thoughts on that, using AI to assist simplification.
I mean, it plays a massive role. Definitely, there's no doubt about it. I think it's about, I think we're just all playing with AI, aren't we? Well, I'm saying we're all playing with AI. I think some people are using it in a much more, I'm playing with AI. But yeah, it plays a big role in being able to help simplify. There's no doubt about it. I don't know if I have any more to say, actually.
Okay.
I probably don't play.
I suppose I was thinking about also if we're thinking about AI taking out standard things that would otherwise take us a lot of time, versus when we're talking about simplifying, we often end up equating simplifying with efficiency. But actually, we could have a simple process, for example, to sort of circle around and come back and review something in a kind of design thinking process. So it doesn't have to be complex. It could be a simple process, but it might add deepened value. So it doesn't have to be efficient. So I think we just need to disconnect. Simplifying doesn't always mean efficient, because efficiency is sometimes the trap we get into with, if it's not efficient, then I shouldn't be doing it. But actually, efficiency also requires us to silo things, to specialize things, to prevent people from talking to each other because it's not efficient. But we do lose something in the organization when we do that. So the simplification needs to ask the question, where is efficiency most important here, and where are other things more important? Actually learning from each other, or experimenting with something, or building the culture, or talking across parts of the organization. So that I think it's really important that we don't equate those. And for a long time, we have always equated simplify with make more efficient, which often degrades people's experience of working and makes jobs feel like they're low value and not as meaningful. So I think we can disconnect those, and you can still be effective without and simplify. So and if you can get rid of that level of complexity, then there's less sense of overwhelm, I think. Yeah. It doesn't mean it's easy. It's easy to say and harder to do, of course.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions early on that I think we missed out, which is really talking into polarities, about autonomy and empowerment. Fiona spoke to them. I think Richard and/or James may also have noted those. And how we kind of deal with those polarities. And I think that's the point, is you've got to spot them in the first place. You've got to understand that they are polarities, that both sides of the polarity are equally desired, and they're interdependent with each other. And if you think that you're going for one over the other, then expect the downsides. So you've got to really understand that and work with your leadership. And that, again, comes back to capability, your own capability, leaders' capability, the culture that you're operating within, and whether they can see the system in the same way. and taking them through a journey, because sometimes the culture and the leaders aren't ready for that level of thinking. And so you may need to take them through a journey of helping them to see the system, first of all, and how the patterns operate.
I love Teresa's comment here, which is efficiency is the enemy of enrichment, which is I do want to take out so much that the work is no longer enriching. And I think that's absolutely it. When we look at, sometimes we are rolling out AI everywhere and it becomes, if the hammer is the only tool we have, everything is a nail. And sometimes that is how we're looking at AI, isn't it? That we're using it across the piece for everything without, exactly as you're saying, Alex, thinking about what is the outcome here? Is it about simplifying things, or is it just about creating efficiency? And we really do need to go back to outcome. What's the organizational outcome? How does it tie into purpose and strategic intent? And really going back to basics here, because that's what we would do if we didn't have AI in the picture and we were looking at simplifying things. We just need to keep going back and thinking, this is a tool that we use. We have other tools that we use, and AI is simply a tool that we use. And it's so integrated now into our workspace that it's so easy to forget that.
Yes, and just to add something to that, I think also what you said there was about the long-term view. So I think there's so much urgency about AI at the moment. We all have to be using it instantaneously. That actually we need to remember, if we de-skill the organizations, and there's a real risk here that we don't build capability. We just sort of scoop it out somehow and lose it. And that's happened more than one occasion in the civil service and all over the public sector. But we need to think about, well, how are we building an organisation for the future, not just delivering the thing that needs to be done for next week? And that's really hard in the civil service when you have immediate demands, and the demands don't stop, each week and each day, and you're on a political timescale as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we've probably got a few more minutes. I think one or two people are starting to leave.
Some people need to go.
Grabbing their lunch.
More questions.
Maybe. Yeah,
did you see James Comer's question?
Oh, tell me.
It was a bit higher up, but I just wanted to make sure that we got to it, because it was.
Otherwise, I was just going to ask for your parting thoughts, kind of last parting thoughts, and maybe you can weave it in as part of yours too.
How does your approach speak to the tension between the need for control and cohesion versus the need for autonomy to be responsive and innovative?
Yeah. So I think part of that we talked about in terms of recognizing the polarities that are inherent within an organization, and kind of working some of that through, and being aware of those polarities, and then embedding that into your design work so that you can get the best of both sides of those polarities. And sometimes there's other ways of looking at them, and recognizing that some polarities are interdependent with each other as well. I'm just thinking about like Kristen Brown's leadership diamond is one example of that, where you've got reality and vision, then you've got courage and service, and they're all interdependent with each other. And I'm just wondering, that set that was it James that was talking about may also be something like that, where they're all interdependent with each other, and you need to think about that quite carefully as you work things through. Now, that's a bit too conceptual at this time, but certainly I would probably take people down a polarity management route and help them understand those and map them out, develop some actions that would maximize the benefits, and some measures that would identify when you're getting into the downsides of those polarities, so that you can monitor those things as part of a dashboard and ensure you're trying to get the best of all. That's my very simple answer to probably quite a complex question, I think, which requires a lot more.
There is definitely something, about those tensions in the organisation, the interdependent pairs. I was immediately thinking about the interdependencies, and just thinking that those are interdependencies that will never kind of disappear in an organisation. They will always be there. This sense of always a need for control and always a need for innovation, and actually just thinking about different issues that exist in the organisation, like where is there more of a need for control and where is there more of a need for innovation or responsiveness? And perhaps going back to your point, Nick, so thinking about some prioritization. So actually, where do we need to just control it rather than just being everything is controlled, or suddenly we're being more innovative about everything, just being a bit, a bit more planned and, just going through things and thinking about things in a sort of a more kind of planned way about that, or just bringing them to the surface. Actually, where do these tensions exist when we actually start surfacing them, noticing where they are? Sometimes that's just really helpful.
And I think sometimes in projects I've done is to also take the strategic opportunity that you've got. So whatever's coming up that is the big thing that needs to be delivered, whatever has strategic momentum, what opportunity does that give you to do something with the key elements of the culture you'd like to change? What opportunities do you have within that strategic direction? It's really hard to swim against that tide. So how could you use that momentum in that direction to enable you to build more autonomy in, or do more cultural cohesion? Or so how can you kind of tap into that strategic direction and use that momentum and direction to help you move things forward in the organization, enable more autonomy, build a culture that you want, add value, rather than thinking that's in opposition to the strategic requirements that are being asked of you. Sort of getting those things dovetailed together. I often think about it like a sort of, like fish in a shoal or something. Once everyone starts swimming in the same direction, actually easier to change other things because there's momentum moving. So that's one of the ways that I've brought culture into other big transformation programs that I've done.
Yeah. So maybe one parting thought from each of us then. So who would like to go first? Tammy, do you want to one last parting thought before we finish?
Yeah, I think there's something about stepping back and looking at those predominant patterns in the organization. What is your organization telling you what it needs? So often there is so much noise about what other parts of a system is telling you your organization needs or your team needs, but actually look at what the organization is telling you. I think that would probably be the parting thought. Tap into the patterns.
I think it's, just to build on what Tammy's saying, really, I think it's trying to take, and building what I just said, I think it's trying to take the opportunities you have to build in those other needs. So how can you have that longer term vision for the place you want to be in, the way that you're working, that culture, and still tie it into what are the strategic deliverables for the department, or what's the minister need today? How do we keep tying those things in together so that they end up being part of the same deliverables rather than in opposition when there's not, so there's no, and then suddenly there's no resources to do that as well. How do we, so bringing those together, even if it means you simplify them down, so you can't do everything, but which ones could be brought forward with the particular deliverables that have to be done?
Yeah. I think my last parting thought goes all the way back to the beginning of the session, thinking about the law of requisite variety, or Ashby's law, which is really saying that you'll never eliminate complexity because an organization needs to be complex enough and flexible enough to thrive within a dynamic, complex external environment. And yet, what can we stop? And I'm just going to finish with a brief story of a contact and a friend of mine who started a new job as an HRD in an organization. First thing he did, he just stopped all reports being written, and he thought, let me see who shouts. And if people shout, we'll have a conversation. And if they don't, we'll stop him. And so my parting thought is there does need to be a level of courage. And I just encourage everyone to try and be courageous, to find the one thing maybe that you can stop. Maybe it's in your life, maybe it's in work, maybe it's with a leader, maybe you need to be really brave with a minister or someone else. But yeah, just think, what is that one courageous act that is going to really help your organization by you saying no? Thank you very much, everyone. It's great that you all joined. It's great that you all stayed all the way to the end. And love to be in contact. As I've said before, do reach out. Do reach out if you'd like to have a further chat. Alex, Tammy and I would love to chat with you. We'd love to find out what's going on for you, share some of our thinking, share a bit more, check out our case studies, look at the podcast. And if you'd like a chat, then reach out to me and I can set it up, whether it's with Tammy, Alex, or myself. Otherwise, also reach out to us on LinkedIn. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you all. Really appreciated the conversation.
Thank you.
Fiona.
Great. Lovely to hear from you. Thank you.